jazz musicians are constantly trying to add new language, broaden my language, broaden my language, broaden my language, but oftentimes not really asking themselves, like, how can I do more with less?
Hi, I'm Sean Perrin, and you're listening to the Clarineat Podcast, the show for clarinetists. On today's show, Sam Sadigursky shares his experience playing minimalist music with the Philip Glass Ensemble, jazz music with Brad Mehldau, and tips for improvising as a classically trained player. If you're looking for extra help with these sort of contemporary techniques, he's also written some etude books, which you can check out at his website at samsadigursky.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the Clarineat Podcast wherever you happen to be listening, and if you'd like access to the ad-free extended version of the show, you can do this at clarineat.com/join. You can actually get your first 30 days for free with code TRYGOLD at checkout. That's code TRYGOLD at clarineat.com. That's to access the Clarineat Gold Edition. I'd love to thank the people who are supporting the podcast in that way and also on Patreon, and of course to our wonderful sponsors, Canadian companies Bakun Musical Services and Leger Reeds. Thank you so much for making the program possible. The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code Clarineat at bakunmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase, and try the Bakun Q-Series or Protégé clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at bakunmusical.com and use code Clarineat at checkout. Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger Reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with a great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and the bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store, or you can now save 10% on your Leger reeds with code Clarineat at checkout at leger.com. That's LEGERE.com. I'm here on the podcast today with Sam Sadigursky, who's coming to us from New York City in the United States. He is a multi-talented clarinetist, doubler, composer, and recording artist who has performed on over 50 albums, including the Grammy, Tony, and Emmy award-winning show, The Band's Visit on Broadway. He's also, of course, a member of the Philip Glass Ensemble since 2020, and we are very, very lucky to have him here today on the program. Sam, welcome to the Clarineat Podcast.
Thank you, Sean. Thrilled to be here.
So you're one of those guests that I've been trying to get in touch with for a while, and we've been meaning to have this interview for quite a while, but as we were talking about before we went on air here, there's been so many hang-ups, with the whole COVID situation that's just never ending, and, us having a baby here, and my God, it's just been so busy. But I'm very, very happy to finally get a chance to connect with you. So first of all, for those listeners who may not, know your work intimately, could you give a brief sort of summation as to what you do and how you got involved with the Philip Glass Ensemble most recently?
Yeah, as a performer, I've kind of been all over the map in terms of what I do. I grew up kind of loving jazz, but my almost 25 years here in New York, just sort of making a career have taken me in a lot of other paths. It's just kept me busy having a broad set of skills. So, I grew up kind of playing saxophone, and the clarinet and the flute were sort of doubles. But, always things that I was quite serious about that was instilled in me really, really early, that doubling well would make me employable as a musician. And over the last 10 years or so, I think there was a gradual evolution where clarinet became more and more my focus and my voice and the thing that people called me for. And now sort of creatively, and what I do as a leader is really clarinet centric. The pandemic was actually an amazing time in that I got to just play clarinet for a very, very long time, which I had a blast with. And now as we're coming out of the pandemic and I'm sort of pulled again in other directions, I can see actually just how valuable that pandemic time, as hard as it was for me. But as far as the Glass Ensemble, I had the unfortunate timing of doing my first concerts with them in early 2020. And actually, we did a big performance of Music in 12 Parts, which is, one of Philip's early manifestos. It's a 5-hour concert that you do. I was thrown into sort of deep water with them, but that was, I think, like February 28th or March 1, 2020. We performed that in Philadelphia.
Oh wow!
Um,
So things shut down like a week later, basically.
yeah, and looking back, it was crazy that we were doing that because we were all hearing whisperings at that point. So, anyways, and it's picking back up a little bit. My connection to the ensemble was really long-term relationships with them. There are three winds in the ensemble, and the two other wind players are very, very close friends and colleagues of mine. I sort of am playing in the chair of the late John Gibson, who was an incredible composer and saxophonist, who unfortunately passed away in 2020. But he was one of the original members of the ensemble. I actually don't play clarinet in the ensemble yet. The chair is soprano, saxophone, and flute. They've actually opened up the option of if playing clarinet on something if it sort of calls to me. So we'll see if that happens down the road. A lot of it would be very, very, a lot of the music, at least that's written, for the Philip Glass Ensemble, um, is very relentless, and I think would be a lot more challenging to play on clarinet than it is on saxophone or flute. And a lot of it's very, very fast as well.
I want to talk a little bit about this if it's okay, because I think that a lot of musicians, certainly in my time at university, my professors, are very dismissive of minimalist music as a genre, and they don't understand sometimes or take it seriously enough as a performance art to really understand the intricacies and do a good job and then enjoy the music in a way that maybe it can be or should be enjoyed. What comes to mind to me actually is a piece called In C by Terry Riley. Anyone who has played that piece really, I think, appreciates it. And anyone who hasn't almost sees it as a joke party piece, But it's very difficult to actually play that piece in the sense of it's somewhat improvisatory. It has a lot of endurance element that you just don't consider. Like you're basically playing nonstop for however long it goes on for, with musical breaks in between. But part of it is learning to plan that silence and really just, I don't know. So I had a professor who wrote a review actually of Philip Glass's concert here in Calgary back in about 2007, I would say. And in the review, he said something which struck me as I was reading it as kind of a compliment. But then when I reread it, I realized that he was actually using it as an insult. He said something like, Philip Glass's music, it skips over the mind and goes straight for the heart. And knowing this person personally, I know that he meant that in a derogatory way. But to me, I was like, man, isn't that the goal of, or shouldn't that be the goal of all music, is to, bypass that and go straight for the emotions? So anyway, if you could just go into like, as a professional player, what is it like interpreting and realizing minimalist music as part of one of the minimalist founders ensembles?
Wow, we could talk a lot about this. Well, I remember when Andrew Sturman first, who is one of the really long-term members of the ensemble, kind of like the flute specialist in the ensemble, first asked me if I wanted to step in for John Gibson on some of those performances in 2020. I said, Andrew, I don't circular breathe, because I just had always assumed that that's what they were doing. And it turns out that's not the case. They really fill up, and I think the wind section in the group really see, the group is two keyboards, one chair that's keyboard and voice, and then three wind players, and it's a combination of saxophones and flutes in the winds. And obviously the keyboards can play constantly, and they do. And then we're seen as sort of like the human element. And the textures of our three wind parts change constantly because we have to take breaks and we breathe, and we try to do that in a way that's musical and artistic and serves the piece we're playing. And we really try to stagger, and there's an incredible just like team effort that goes in. I sit in the middle of the two guys actually, and I'm constantly aware of like when one of them is sort of like hitting their ends and is going to lay out for a section, and just make sure that I push myself to be in that section so that, two of us haven't dropped out. And yeah, back to what that professor had said, I'm totally with you. I don't think music is an intellectual exercise. I mean, that's always part of the joy for me, is the intellectual aspect, but it should go to the heart, you know. And I think Glass's music, I think because it's sort of like grouped in the, it's presented so often in as classical music in the classical world. And I think if you were to talk to Philip, I don't think he sees it that way. I think that's just sort of been like the most convenient place to present it. But I think, you know, the idea with the Glass Ensemble originally was to have a group that could really play anywhere. And, you know, their beginnings were, you know, playing lofts in New York. And you know, we performed a concert in New York, I think in June 2021. That was sort of our first concert for people in a long time. And Philip actually came, and you know, he didn't really like the venue because he said he said it was not that he didn't like the venue, but he said, you know, this is a beautiful place. It was like this rooftop, not rooftop, but you know, very very high floor in New York. It was an unconventional venue, but he felt like, you know, this place was built to keep people out, and we play places that aren't that way, that are open to everybody. So, you know, but I think his music gets placed like in that classical canon. And, you know, some people have certain expectations of like what it should sound like, or, you know, what the level of sophistication should be. And yeah, I think Philip has studied the classical canon and taken a lot from it. But I don't think he necessarily sees that his music that way. And I can say as a performer getting into it, that I mean, especially rhythmically, it calls upon, you know, every aspect of my musical training and career to play this music. The rhythmic sophistication that's in there is astounding. And you know, like I played sort of my real rhythmic sort of, I don't know, training or like doctorate came from playing Latin music for many years and South American music, and really learning how to, you know, feel twos and threes and mix them up and feel them on top of each other. And yeah, Philip's music really calls upon that in such a deep way. Even though they're, you know, he writes without time signatures. There's so much metric thing. There's so much polyrhythmic and metric things that happen, and so much time spent sort of like tightening those things in the ensemble.
Well, like you said, it's harder to play than it maybe first sounds, especially for the pianist on some of those pieces where it's a hemiola and they're playing that together. It's not simple to make that really ring out and the two parts to be individual at the same time combined, if that makes sense. And it's what I like about it is your ear can kind of land in different places, but yet it's all still cohesive. It's sort of cool to listen to in that way, and I think that it has just such a special kind of atmosphere, which I really enjoy too. I have to ask, like, how much involvement, because Philip Glass started this ensemble back in the 60s, I believe, and as a laboratory for his music, I think he called it. And this was, I can't remember if it was after or before he began some studies. I think it was in India, correct me if I'm wrong, just of more rhythmic music than the typical, Western classical type of music. And this, as it did the Beatles, strongly influenced his style and his use of rhythm. But I think of other musicians like Chick Corea, who recently passed away, unfortunately, but he had said it's wrong to drum at the piano. Like, you should play it like that. But I do feel like Philip Glass is drumming at the piano. So what can we take from this kind of sort of conflicting idea? And should great ideas just get to be on their own? And is there such a thing as a wrong idea, really, in music?
Well, the idea that Chick Corea isn't drumming at the piano is shocking, because
Yeah.
I think all instruments are drumming on some level. And,
Yeah, right?
you know, drumming is rhythm. And, you know, anything we play, even things that are completely out of time, should have this deep rhythmic aspect that I feel when I listen to excellent music or great players. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the influence comes from Indian music. I mean, there's like kind of mixed meter things and so many other types of music, and I think Philip has, you know, traveled the world and taken from so many different things. I mean, also like the trance and drone elements of Indian music are certainly a deep part of what he does. As terms that you had asked about kind of the endurance element, and yes, I mean the pieces are very, very long, and there's constant playing, and it's just something you learn to navigate as you go along, and you learn how to pace yourself. Playing a soprano saxophone, you can play a very, very soft reed, and that's just totally essential. And still make it sound acceptable. I'm not completely sure I could do that on the clarinet, actually. And I'm lucky in that I tend to sort of like go back between back and forth between soprano, saxophone, and flute. And obviously, playing flute gives, not it's not. I don't want to use the term bite, but that certain fatigue that I might feel like playing a reed instrument, I get a little break from when I do go to flute. But yeah, I mean, you sometimes you just end up in a trance yourself playing, and the mental focus that's required is tremendous. And there's the system of cueing that the ensemble sort of uh has developed to play this music. And oftentimes, like, music in 12 parts, which is this you know 4-hour piece, is actually not that many pages. I mean, sorry, your viewers are not actually watching us, but it's the book for that is probably, I don't know, 20 pages, 25 pages or so. It's not a huge amount of music, but it's cycling through these sections, and they're cued out, and so you're always on the watch for the cues. And part of the art is actually learning. There's almost nobody in the ensemble who doesn't get lost at some point, and learning how to sort of like get back on. And and the amazing sort of like ensemble work is often sort of knowing when your neighbor might need a little help, and how to communicate to them.
Yeah, this reminds me so much of. I was really fascinated with minimalist music during my degree, and I remember the first time I did encounter like in C, for example, and it is one page with 53 little cells, and you're like, how can this be interesting to listen to, let alone a long piece? But if you're not careful, it can easily be 2 hours long, and I guess that's that's what happens with these sorts of pieces, right? You get into it, you as you experience it more, there's things you want to do or not do.
Yeah, it's very much, I came up with jazz, and I think, I mean, we're not sort of like improvising ever in the traditional sense, but every performance of it is different in that way, that the musical sort of cells are an open number of times, and you'll never hear the same piece twice in that way.
Totally. Even with the same performers, same intention, it'll never be quite the same.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Reisman, the musical director, I mean, his history in the ensemble, and collaborating with Philip, is so incredibly deep that I think he has a very, very deep sense of the lengths that he wants things to be, and they end up often being pretty darn close. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting aspect of the music. Um, yeah, just playing in the ensemble has had such a huge influence on what I'm writing and doing as a leader, and the way that I listen to music. So much of modern music and modern jazz is so incredibly great. But I was listening to a podcast interview with an incredible jazz pianist, Shai Maestro, who records for ECM now, and he sort of compared a lot of music to, like, it's like somebody taking you to a Picasso exhibition, and you ride through it on a motorcycle, and it's just like, you don't get time to sort of like take any of it in. By the you've like moved on to the next thing before you've had the chance to really take in what's current. And that's really how a lot of it makes me feel, that I wish they had like spent more time with these like beautiful ideas that are there. And that's, yeah, something that I've really learned from this minimalist music. And jazz musicians are constantly trying to add new language, broaden my language, broaden my language, broaden my language, but oftentimes not really asking themselves, like, how can I do more with less?
Mm, yeah, I love that. I love your analogy about the motorcycle too. That's exactly how I feel with streaming services. It drives me nuts. They're always pushing what's new, what's new, what's new, and it's not about just like getting into your music anymore, as sort of CDs or LPs sort of used to be. So it's can be frustrating in that sense of glossing over the surface of so much music that you don't ever go deep on it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother
Yeah,
series
another
of podcasts, and
totally,
that's something
totally.
I spend so much time thinking, and of the last generations that will know what a CD and album is,
Yeah.
and what that experience is, and just like not consuming music through a smartphone, which is, I mean, Spotify and streaming, it's just an incredible playground, and it's such a dream. And I think there's something so cool as, a creator, that now I can make something and tell people about it, and they can just access it right away. And that's an astounding thing that, before I was like, hey, Sean, I have this new record, and you had to like, go to your local record store, and there was like, 99% chance they didn't have it, and find some way to get it. And it was this long protracted thing. Now you can kind of hear that stuff right away. And that's amazing. But also it comes with a lot of drawbacks, and we're constantly, if something doesn't pull us in right away, we just like can go to the next thing. We go to the next thing, we go to the next thing, and we sort of lose that period where maybe if we'd stuck with it, we might have really found something magical.
That's an interesting kind of point about like the inaccessibility of stuff though, like music, because I'm thinking back to what it must have been like for Philip in the 70s to share and spread his music around, and there must have been a certain type of like underground sense to like having one of his early vinyls or something in the 70s and like, oh, check this out, it's so cool. And it wasn't just available in everyone's pocket. It was probably something much more kind of mysterious for a while, as it sort of burbled up from the musical cauldron of New York City in a way. But before we move on, I want to talk about some of your albums and much more that you've done actually. But before we do move on from this ensemble, I'm just wondering. So day to day, Philip has kind of stepped out of it years ago from a day to day performer. But
No, actually not years ago.
oh,
He only stopped performing in the ensemble in 2019 or 2020. I actually was sort of, those first performances that I was on were the first ones without him.
really? So all that time. So I thought for some reason that he was only a partial member for longer than that. But so what is his involvement nowadays with the ensemble, and what is it like, working or discussing his music with him?
Well, Philip just had his 85th birthday.
Yes.
And so he decided a few years ago that he was kind of done doing most of the travel that he had kind of done all of his life, for not just the ensemble, but all the works that he was doing and the premieres. And so, yeah, so now the ensemble is continuing on, and it has kind of the exclusive right to play a huge catalog of his music. All this stuff can't be performed by other ensembles. If a venue wants to present it, they have to hire the Glass Ensemble. And so, and obviously he allows us to use his name, and we're trying to move forward and navigate this new post-COVID world, which is very, very challenging, as everybody knows.
So his interaction lately is pretty much almost like almost retired from the group, basically.
Yes, he come when we've played in New York. He's always come. I mean, the members of the ensemble were, are family to him. I mean, the history is so deep, and the ensemble is so close to him, that I think he makes every effort to be there when we do perform.
I didn't know that they were exclusive rights. That's so interesting. So, like, if I wanted to put on a concert of some of these pieces, I literally can't legally.
Yeah, you
Wow.
can't present music in 12 parts.
Wow, I didn't know that.
And a lot of that is just, I can't, the skills are kind of so unique and specialized, and also the sounds that are presented by the ensemble. I mean, they the keyboard patches, and Lisa Bilava's vocal techniques, and it's so special, and I can understand why they protect it in that way.
So, of course, that's not the case for all of Philip's music, though. I mean, much of it can be played by anyone in a recital or something like that. But is it just these specific pieces that the Glass Ensemble kind of champions that you shouldn't do that or can't do that with?
Yes, yeah, I think so. I mean, you can order a book of his piano pieces online. There are things you can get.
Interesting.
But yeah, I had this experience in the car the other day on the way back from the city. I actually live, a little bit north of the city in the suburbs, and they were playing the opening to Glassworks, which is a solo piano piece, and to me, it's just I cannot get enough of that piece, and I just like and I heard it, and it's so incredibly simple in a way, and so powerful, and whatever the critics say and people and inside the vaulted classical world are just like, I don't want to live in a world where that piece doesn't exist. I don't care what you call it. But it's so timeless, and it so powerfully spoke to where I was at that moment, and it was just a almost like transcendent experience moment for me. And back to what we were talking about with streaming and whatever, that's also just like that magic of hearing something on the radio. And there's like a certain like amount of togetherness, because even though maybe you're not physically together, there's this community of people hopefully that are listening to that same radio station, that are having that same experience. But so much of my musical education, in college, we got stoned and just like shared our record collections with each other. I mean, it was mostly CDs, but we didn't all have access to everything at our fingertips, and it was really magical, like sharing what you were checking out, and vice versa.
I miss the social element of like college and music where you just get together with people and just sit in a room and listen. And before iPhones and stuff like that, I don't think that kids nowadays will kind of have that same experience. I mean, there's this constant thing in your hand distracting you from what you're trying to do. And I remember just sitting with people, late in the evening, just listening to music as a sole activity, as a social activity though too. And I don't know how much of that there is now, but I should try and get you my CD that I recorded, because I did a recording of, or an arrangement, sorry, of opening and Truman Sleeps for marimba and vibraphone, which I also play a bit of marimba. So it kind of like bookended the album, and then there was some Chick Corea things in the middle. So yeah, I should try to get you
I
that.
love
I'd
that.
love to hear. Actually, I'd love to hear Philip's feedback on it. I tried to contact him at that point, but never, wasn't able to. So, but anyway, yeah, opening and that whole album, Glassworks, is such a cool piece. So
Yeah, the second piece in that is kind of one of our regular concert things that we play in concerts.
yeah, if you haven't checked that out, that'd be a great one to kind of start with, but also dive into for sure some of the the bigger works like Music in 12 Parts, etc. And so do be sure to check out the Philip Glass Ensemble at philipglassensemble.com. And but let's dive into some of the other stuff that you've done, because there's just so much here that we can talk about. Of course, you've worked with other artists like Brad Mehldau, which is I love his playing. What was your involvement with him?
I happened to meet Brad Melhldau as I was probably 17 years old. I grew up in Los Angeles, and he was living there for a year or two, and kind of, moved there without knowing a lot of people, and we got hooked up, and he invited me to his house to play, and we became friends, and we've kind of been in touch ever since. He asked me to do a duo gig, and that was a very I don't even know how to describe that experience. I mean, I think it was like I was just like a cocky little kid, and just went and played with Brad Melhldau. I mean, I think that would actually be a lot more intimidating, now,
I know exactly what
25
you
years later
mean.
or whatever,
Yeah.
somehow. But yeah, and then about 10 years ago, he was commissioned by Carnegie Hall to write a piece for two pianos, and I think four or five woodwinds. So I was a part of that, and that was amazing, because not only was it Brad, but the saxophone section on that, where it had Joshua Redman and Chris Cheek and Greg Tardy, and some real heroes of the instrument.
That's amazing. That's so interesting. It's again so diverse as to your playing. I'll have to talk to you afterwards, but Brad has been someone I've been trying to get on my other podcast, which is about Radiohead. He did some incredible piano arrangements. I don't know if you're familiar with them, of some of those pieces. I think Paranoid Android, and
Yeah.
maybe one other one which escapes me right now. But incredible, yeah, incredible playing. So much improvisation with that, which is so different than the work with the Philip Glass Ensemble, I'm sure. So
Absolutely. And he was such a huge part of just like bringing current rock music into the jazz world in a really interesting and fresh and kind of organic way.
yeah, really interesting. So, what advice do you have then for those who are looking to like do more improvisation and perhaps doubling and recording and just sort of having a more expansive career as you've accomplished as far as the many genres and styles of music you've played and many different projects, ranging from chamber music to jazz to minimalism, and it's just so diverse.
My musical education really um, was not traditional. I just kind of learned by doing and by just being thrown into the fire. So, I didn't really learn harmony out of a book. Basically, my first teacher, my major teacher growing up was a guy named Vince Trombetta. And he'd just be like, you know what? Let's have you write a saxophone quartet. I knew nothing about arranging harmony. And it was just like sort of this process of doing. That's always how I've learned. And I think also I was very much, my parents are musicians, and I didn't really have, a lot of the illusions that I think young people going into a music career might have about, what lays ahead of them. I sort of like knew had a better idea than most, I think, about what the realities were. And I was just like, okay, I have to work and I'm gonna say yes to everything. And I really and that took me a lot of places where I learned a lot of things.
It's funny you say that. Stanley Drucker said basically the same thing. He just started saying yes to all that he could, and and that's such interesting advice from the standpoint too, though, of like a lot of people nowadays. I think they feel like they need to get XYZ thing done before they can do the next step of their career, whether that be their doctorate or watch whatever YouTube learning series or whatever. I mean, if you think about Bach, Mozart, Beethoven, all these great composers, just to name a few, in the past, I mean, there was no music harmony books in the sense that we know today that analyze all. They had to invent these things.
Yeah. Like as an improviser, I mean, the major sort of like first step of my learning was my teacher would say, okay, let's sit down and compose a solo over the changes of all the things you are. And I didn't have a real jazz vocabulary at that point that I was tapping into. A lot of people start with like, okay, here are your 2-5-1 licks and let's try to inject these. Basically I spent, you know, thousands of hours probably just sitting at a piano. And I mean, I knew enough about like reading chord symbols to where I could sort of like plunk out 1-3-5-7 and root position. And I just sat at the piano finding things and sounds that I liked and wrote those down. And improvisation is composition that's in the moment, without a pen and paper. And so that process was slowed down. And really, I think that's how I learned, and that's how I train my ears as well. And, you know, improvisation is still just such a fascinating thing. It's just like an endless journey. And everybody kind of has taken a different road to get to where they are as an improviser. But one sort of like quality or ability I think that every single improviser has, or every improviser that's really worth listening to, is I think there's a deep idea of the sound of any note, either against another note or against a chord or with a chord on top of a chord, however you want to say it. And it's not something that you can put into words, but if there's a C minor chord, I know exactly what like every single note, how it'll sort of like touch that C minor chord and what it might want to do.
Do you mean as far as just like dissonance and resolution and creating tension and release, that kind of thing?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. It's funny you say that because I have done limited study of improvisation, but the CD project I was talking about actually did receive some jazz grants and things. And one of the things we did was study with some, I think it was four different improvisers, and they each had sort of interesting different takes on how to do different elements, which, you know, as someone who was new to it, I found really interesting. But one of the most interesting points was like, you're only ever really a semitone away from a right note. And if you play a wrong note, like play it again, you know, like make it.
Absolutely. And, you know, when people come to me, you know, wanting advice on starting improvisation, I always just say, play with drones.
Yeah.
Everybody, you know, it's so easy to get overwhelmed by all the information and technical aspects. And, you know, a lot of people sort of like learn via this like chord scale thing where like there are these chords and there are these scales you can play over these chords. But, you know, really the ears are the first step. And just like, you know, if you're a classical musician, just liberating yourself from the written page and dealing with the mental blocks that you have. And I think one of the really, really easy and effective ways is you know, find some app or, you know, there's now it's like you can find albums that are just drones now and just play with them and see what comes out and start there.
Even just your major, minor, whatever scales up and down, and listen to what happens. I think is important. Like when you're playing that, you know, second above the root. Like, what do you? Where does it want to go? Like, what would you do with it?
Exactly. You know, and another thing is just like take little simple folk tunes, you know, or kids songs or whatever, and play them in all the keys. I'm kind of astounded how many people, you know, move on to sort of like sophisticated things before being able to do that, and just how valuable that is. Play Happy Birthday in all 12 keys, and see if you could do that. I mean, play Old MacDonald in 12 keys.
Have you heard the story of that pianist? I can't remember who it was. A really famous pianist, though, was asked to play Happy Birthday for someone at some private dinner party, and he had this moment where he realized, like, wait a minute, I don't know how to do that. And so he made some joke like, you know, that's not in my repertoire, and everyone just laughed and they moved on. But like, he quite seriously did not know how to do that after, and he just finished playing like Rachmaninoff. So this is, I think, why it's important to have an improvisational element, or, you know, a basic understanding of chord progressions and things as part of everyone's repertoire.
Absolutely.
One more thing it makes me think of before we move on is I've been taking some. You're mentioning the pandemic, how you focused on clarinet. I actually decided to take some guitar lessons online with someone who I've been following his YouTube channel for a long time, and finally I just was like, hey, do you do some lessons? And we've been interacting. It's been really great. But he is totally differently minded than I was as far as his training. He's all about like the sound, chords, the relationship of the notes, and just getting off the paper. And so some of the stuff he was having me do is like, you know, play your scale on the guitar and then play each chord as a scale, and then try and make like a song, but then pick some little riff and then play it through each chord and see how the riff interacts with every chord. And then before you know it, you've got like maybe a song idea or something that's got a really cool repetitive kind of droning thing throughout it, that it just was a mind-blowing way of practicing your scales, which if you do it wrong can be so boring. But if you put on a drone and you look at your scale practice as improvising, I think it can be a lot more exciting.
Yeah, I'm terrible. You know, a lot of people have a real daily routine they do that kind of like is their clarinet calisthenics, and I think is hugely beneficial to just like playing the instrument. And I have never had anything like that. I'm kind of all over the place. There are a few sort of like warm up type things that sort of like pop up in my worlds. But you know, I don't stick with one, you know, the way that a lot of people do. And you know, I think that's been a shortcoming for me in a lot of ways and has limited, you know, what I can do on the instrument in some ways. But you know, that is just sort of my musical mentality. And you know, Steve Lacy, the great soprano saxophonist, composer, and you know, just talked about making daily bread with his music, you know, or like with his
Yeah.
in his not with his music, but in his practice, and just like, you know, he was very much in the moment. And yeah, I remember growing up, you know, like a lot of times it would be like, well, play in all 12 keys, play in all 12 keys. But I would often like pick just like a key of the day. And, I would be in like my science class, in 10th grade or whatever, thinking about my practice after school, and just like, today's key is going to be E flat major or whatever. And I would just like improvise an E flat major and do everything I knew in E flat major that day.
That's exactly what one of my teachers for the improv stuff said. Was he'd like roll a dice basically and like pick a note, and he'd do everything he could think of on that note for the day. All the intervals, all the scales, all the patterns, all the little songs he could play or pieces or whatever, and just kind of, see how long he could go on just, see.
Yeah. One of the things that pretty much always like comes into my little, warm up that I do is there are these flute exercises written by a composer named Roy Kurt. I don't know anything else, or maybe I don't even know if he was a flutist or just a composer. Um, but if I could do those all on clarinet really well, that might just be it. They're so great and address just everything that you need. Some of them are kind of boring, but there's a few that are just astoundingly great and rewarding to play. And yeah, maybe it's something that you can put a link to as well. I know they're from the 19th century, so they're up on the IMSLP and whatnot.
So speaking of etude books, let's segue into your etude books. You have 3 or 4 actually that you have composed yourself. And clarinet players, this is something that they can purchase from your website at samsadigursky.com, as well as your music, which we'll get to in a second. But tell me a bit about your etude books. I must be honest, I know you've sent them to me. I haven't had the chance to dive into them with a newborn here, but I do plan this summer to have a more in-depth look. But you've got some great reviewers here by Michael Lowenstern, who's also been on the show, and many others. So tell me a bit about your etude books.
Thanks. Yes. So there's three books for clarinet. There's two of them have 25 etudes each. And the third book are 10 sort of longer etudes. And this was, I was talking earlier about me sort of like this evolution or transition to really kind of putting the clarinet first. And this was one of my real first steps, was writing these. I mean, I just find writing is maybe my favorite thing to do. And, sometimes I'll just get so wrapped up in it that the whole day has gone by and I've just, done nothing but write. And so, the fact that I could write and also like have a clarinet in my hands and in my mouth for most of those 10 hours when it wasn't like a pencil on the paper was really appealing. But yeah, also I just wanted to write some things that were in a more contemporary language, that was in a language that had a little bit more variety. And also, I'd found that there weren't a lot of clarinet etudes that were in some of the really, really nasty keys. And as most sort of classical orchestral clarinet players, most of the stuff that's in those keys is just put on a clarinet and it's problem solved. And that's not a part of my world. And so I really, a lot of the work I do, I might have to play a solo in, F sharp on the clarinet, and I've had to learn how to kind of navigate those worlds. And back to what we were talking about with like practicing certain keys. Um, but so yeah, that's also kind of a big focus of these books. But yeah, they were really just, more than anything, just like a very fun project. And and I think they do address sort of a lot of the technical problems of the clarinet, as etudes should. I mean, it's funny because, since writing those, I've discovered that there's a lot of great material existing that I didn't know about. That had I known about it, maybe I wouldn't have sort of like thrown my hat into the ring with these. But it's thrilling for me that these books are getting around and that there are people, that who are playing them and hopefully benefiting from them.
Well, I think it's important that new people get their sort of hat in the ring, as you say, because I don't teach a lot anymore, but when I was doing a lot of teaching, I got really tired of all the same etudes and things that, I had done and my teachers had done. And then even the books that I never did touch that, many people have done for so many years. And it's nice to have new music from people you can talk to. sometimes. And I think that especially someone like you with more of a jazz, commercial music, a different kind of background, I mean, people don't realize that, or people, I mean, orchestral players, they don't realize that they have that A clarinet in their bag, but oftentimes like a Broadway player or a doubler or someone who plays commercial music, they don't have that A clarinet in there. So you're right, they encounter the more difficult key signatures a lot more often, even by sight transposition, which to many players is even more intimidating, right? So I think, like, what was your main goal when you wrote these to set out? Like, what it says, book 1, 2, 3, for example. What level of player or ideal kind of person would pick up that first book and work their way through the series?
A certain level of masochism, I would say, for sure. No, they're definitely advanced, and I think if I were to write them again or write more, I would write less advanced things. I think a lot of my focus in those sort of at that in that period was on my fingers and developing that, and I think in the past like 4 or 5 years for me it's more been about just like sound and addressing a lot of real fundamental things. I mean, I'm a real bastard clarinetist, and I find myself like still trying to break a lot of kind of like bad saxophone habits, and it's a lifelong journey, conquering this not conquering but learning this learning this instrument.
It feels like conquering.
um I'm in such awe of people who play the instrument incredibly well. um yeah, I think now I find myself gravitating towards etudes and things that are simpler, where it's still I try still find things that like sort of satisfy me musically. Like I kind of like have a limited appetite for playing a lot of the really traditional clarinet etudes because a lot of them just like start to be the same after a while, and they're very arpeggio based. And so yeah, I try to find things that are simpler these days but still musically interesting. And yeah, one of my sort of projects for the upcoming year or two, I really want to write some duets that I think are contemporary, but like casually playable by fairly advanced player getting together. I just got together with a friend to play duets and drink coffee last weekend, and and I sort of brought like the traditional clarinet books that I have, which are I'm sure there's better stuff out there. But I searched on the internet after we got together looking for like a compendium or a book of a collection, and I didn't find it. I didn't find anything that was out there. So I'd really like to sort of like create something that people can play, sort of that isn't overly complex and or difficult to put together, but I think satisfying and challenging enough.
I think it's a great idea, and I also love when I find etudes, or when I was teaching etudes and duets and things that are again a little more contemporary, kind of exploring contemporary techniques or ideas, or even like loosely touching on jazz or a subtle improvisation section or things like that. It's so nice to see that included sometimes, because we won't find those things if we just relentlessly play rose etudes and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was so lucky. Michael Lowenstern has been like so hugely supportive of my work, and I think that's one of the things that's so remarkable about him. And he's like really tried to find this beyond for his instrument.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, I do also want to touch on you have a 3-disc album project which has been recently released called the Solomon Diaries. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So this is like very Jewish inspired music. My father is actually a clarinetist and accordionist who is this real like encyclopedia of Eastern European folk music and klezmer music. And that's something that I grew up with. And over the last like 10 years, I'd say has become a huge part of my professional life. I kind of perform for a lot of synagogues in the area, as part of their services. And I subbed quite a bit on the last Broadway production of Fiddler on the Roof in the kind of like solo clarinet chair. And then was part of, which you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, The Band's Visit, which was a show that was based on kind of like Arabic and Middle Eastern and Jewish music, And so, yeah, all that stuff became a deeper part of my DNA. And I kind of wanted to write things that were more sort of like folk inspired. And yeah, what pandemic hit and I really needed something to do and, keep me sane. And, it's just so important to just try to make lemonade out of all this. So I was really lucky to be able to record these albums. They're just duo, actually. It's me and an incredible accordionist named Nathan Kosi, who's like just an absolute virtuoso and such a deep, deep musician. So yeah, we got to really develop this music of mine and make 3 albums of it that came out earlier this year.
It's amazing to me, and I feel almost guilty sometimes because people like you with your 3 albums during the pandemic, and I don't feel like I have as much to show for it. But I think it's great though that some people are able to find that kind of creative passion during that time. And I remember early on even saying the one thing that I wonder what will come out of this is the creative projects which we have yet to hear. And this is one of those projects I think that I don't want to say it was inspired by the pandemic, but I think the circumstance of the isolation and everything did lead to the culmination of these pieces and the recordings, surely, right?
Absolutely.
I think that it's. Do you think this would have come to existence had it not been for that sort of isolated, drawn out time that we've all experienced?
I think I would have documented the music, but I don't know that I don't. I'm actually I do know that we wouldn't have found a, a certain depth that's there. Nathan Kosi, the accordionist, and I just like had very, very busy freelance lives before this. And, now that those are actually sort of resuming more for him at the moment than me. But we're just like now we have those challenges again of of connecting and finding time to rehearse and such, and or even like booking gigs. He's about to go away for 6 months. So it was like an incredible thing that we both like really got to give almost all our focus to this music of mine. And I mean, all the suffering and hardship aside, I'm incredibly just like grateful. I'm so grateful for that. And yeah, I mean, I've been astoundingly fortunate in the pandemic and that, my wife has a grown-up job and she's not in the arts. And, I've had a certain stability that a lot of my musician peers have not had, and they've really had to scramble to, how am I going to live through this? Just like through to figure out very elemental things that weren't so much of a challenge for me.
No, I also feel very fortunate. I don't know what to do about that, situation for so many who haven't had the chance to, make ends meet during all this, and I feel really bad for the whole musical community. But I really hope that we can come out of it now. But not to circle back completely, but are these pieces available on Spotify now or the streaming services?
They are on Spotify, or one of the greatest places to kind of consume music and support the people who are making it is Bandcamp.
Bandcamp, yes.
So the albums are up on Bandcamp where you can actually listen to them for free, and if you choose to sort of buy them, the money goes predominantly to the artists, and that's the only place where that actually happens.
Yes, and in a post CD world, that is a great means of supporting artists as well. I think that we forget that people used to have something physical to sell at shows, and now that the streaming is taken over, it's just basically, hey, check out my, Spotify page, or I'll make 0.009 cents if you listen to my song 3 times. It's hard. That's hard. So yeah, do support the artists that you enjoy. And I love the Bandcamp app actually because you can actually stream as if it were Spotify or something within the app, but you've paid the artist,
You've
which
paid the
is
artist and you've sort of like curated
yeah.
your own little world there too. So I also you're not so much as being driven by the algorithm.
Yeah, which I do like. So
I really enjoy that. And then, and I have to say the algorithm is incredible. I mean, I find things on Spotify or things that are like suggested to me by the algorithm that are astoundingly great and have become huge parts of my world. And yeah, it's a very, very tough sort of balance that we all have to live right now with so much power in our pockets and in our laptops and whatever, and sort of navigating that is tremendously difficult.
The Apple Music algorithm is nowhere near as good. I don't like it at all. I wish I would like to go back to Spotify. I'll have to look into that.
Yeah,
But
I think Spotify, part of it is they're a European company, and I really connect with a lot of the music coming out of from European jazz musicians. I think there's actually they've really they're less afraid to draw from these kind of minimalist and folk languages that I really love these days. And yeah, I've just found some astoundingly great things that unfortunately like really don't make it across the pond.
one of the earliest streaming services, which I'm sure no one remembers, was Pandora, and then Rdio. Rdio was my favorite ever. It was so good. Such great recommendations, and I don't know what happened to it. One day it just closed up and Spotify came out. So, well, before we close up here, is there anything else you'd like to share on the program for listeners?
No, I'm just thrilled to be a part of this. I'm sure this is a real clarinet podcast, and it's a huge honor to be on it. And I'm sure there's a lot for me to learn from the people listening to this. So,
Well, it's an idea that I got from the person who's been guest hosting some interviews here, Joel Jaffe. But he's been asking at the end a great question, which I never thought to ask. But was there anything you'd like to ask me before we wrap up?
I'm really just eager to hear your music, and that's something that I will have to do.
Yeah, I'll send it along.
We went in so many different directions. We were going to talk about doubling and things like that, and we'll maybe do this again sometime.
Yeah, it's funny because one of the problems with the album project that I did was I joked that the licensing of the music was so complicated that it's enough to drive you to write your own music next time.
Oh,
So
yes.
if I do another album, I think it will be my own music because it was really difficult to find the licensing of especially the Philip Glass pieces. I think I had to go through the Harry Fox agency in the States or something like that, and but it was much more involved than one might think or realize when they're first starting out.
Yeah, and oftentimes, when you reach out to these kind of big people, they don't even know what to do with kind of like an independent artist, and it's, oftentimes what they might get from it is not even worth their time, and they just simply ignore it.
Yeah, but that was the weird thing is because I did it on a grant, everything had to be completely by the books. So like I couldn't actually book the recording time at the studio until I could present my licenses to do the pieces that weren't my own. And same thing with the CD printing company, the Alberta Foundation of the Arts. I think they've changed this now, but they used to have a stipulation that you must print a certain number of CDs, which I think was 500 at least, to go with your project. But like even in 2015, people were really not wanting CDs anymore. So I still have most of them in my garage. So if you want a CD, send me a message at hello@clarineat.com, and if you pay shipping, I'll send you one. But yeah, I mean, it was really tough because people would support the project and then I couldn't give the CDs away. They would say, "Hey, can you just send me the download card? I don't really need the CD. I don't have a CD player. My laptop doesn't play CDs anymore or whatever." So anyway, but yeah, no, we'll connect about that. And yes, of course, I'd always love to have people back multiple times. So we should do this. We should do this again. But for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, speaking of, or any other free streaming platform, the episode will end here. But for those supporting the show either on Patreon or directly at clarineat.com/join, there are a few bonus questions such as favorite books, favorite albums, favorite musical moments, etc., coming up on the extended lightning round portion of the show. So thank you so much, Sam, for joining me here, and I'll see you in a moment for the lightning round.
All right, thank you, Sean.
Imagine a reed that lets you focus on your music, lasts for months instead of days, and even saves you money in the long run. It's all possible with Leger Reeds, the world's leading synthetic reed brand made right here in Canada. The European cut reed is preferred by Leger artists all over the world, including Eddie Daniels, David Schifrin, Corrado Giuffretti, and many others. It offers a warm, clean sound with a great ease of articulation and is now available for E-flat, B-flat, and the bass clarinet. Learn more at your local music store, or you can now save 10% on your Leger reeds with code Clarineat at checkout at leger.com. That's LEGERE.com. The new Bakun Q-Series clarinet features a completely redesigned bore inspired by the Bakun Custom Series clarinets. This means you can play and perform like the pros, but for less. Use code Clarineat at baccoonmusical.com to save 10% on your entire purchase, and try the Baccoon Q Series or Protégé Clarinet risk-free for 30 days. Just pay the return shipping if you aren't fully satisfied. Shop now at baccoonmusical.com and use code Clarineat at checkout.